This is when our ego, now in a form of a lion, growls its pontifications from a moralistic, religious, self-centered way through sounding quite godly. But underneath it all, there's nothing more than an unconscious spiritual self. Consider the crucifixion. The statement Jesus made is beyond comprehension to the religious mind and many times gets misinterpreted to mean something other than it was said. Hanging on the cross, Jesus says, quote, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do." Luke 23:34. Think about that. Wait, what? Think of our modern religious response. Be more like, quote, "I'm a child of God. Scripture says I'm God's friend, and my God will judge you for what you're doing to me now. You sinner, you morally bankrupt individual. You're headed for hell unless you repent and get me off this cross." But what does Jesus say? They don't know what they do. They're unconscious. We're going to continue with our message, so I'm going to start right away with the video where we change the name from the Forsaken Creator to the I Am Remembered. This is that video. To give a quick overview of the last lesson, which was part 4, the I Am Remembered, aligned with the piece behind our thinking. The two aspects was alignment and attunement. Alignment was about positioning. Attunement was about calibration. We used the analogy of a satellite dish being in proper alignment to receive the broadcast signal, but while it was in alignment, we still had to calibrate it. And one of the key things that we were trying to point out was that the transmitter is not the issue. It's the receiver. And the key is we default in position because we're already created in the image and likeness of God. On the other hand, the calibration has to do with some inner things. And really, that's what we're going to get into today. So consider your image and likeness will never change. It's never going to change. The notion of being separated from God because of sin, or God not blessing you because you did something wrong, or believe you're unrighteous or unworthy, is a distortion of the gospel. Why? You can't separate yourself from your true self. However, if you believe you are, doesn't matter what's real. Thus, we open the Bible, and because of our lack of consciousness of our true self, we go in front-loaded with sin identity and separation thinking. So, now even the New Testament reads to us that way, despite the message. In other words, if you're not calibrated or dialed into the frequency regarding the truth about you, we will create our own sense of reality. When we're dialed in, the reality of alignment is fully realized. In other words, our oneness and emanation of the source, God, Creator, the Father, is realized. We then start to embody the words of Jesus in his prayer to the Father. "The thoughtful esteem which you have given me, I have given them, that they may be one just as we are." That's John 17:22. Consider, Jesus wasn't saying if you keep believing in a rule-based sacrificial system and then do some other right things, you'll be one with me and the Father. No. That system is based on a delusional belief which is built on an identity of sinner and a story of separation. It's that self-imprisoning logic errors inside an endless loop we talked about. It's a revolving door of I'm a sinner and God is far, which never, by the way, produces freedom. Which brings us to the key point about today, not just regarding our positioning, but actually our calibration. The notion of fully realizing the fullness of who and what we truly are, it's from Ephesians 3:19, that we are to know the love of Christ which passes knowledge. And in doing that, we get to know the fullness of God. So the notion of fully realizing the fullness of who and what we are, it is said it passes knowledge. That's what I just read to you. From one perspective, that's true. It's not a knowledge that comes through thinking or a set of beliefs. Again, to quote the Apostle Paul, to know the love of Christ, which passes knowledge. It's kind of a funny way of saying it, to know beyond knowledge. But there's a reason for that vocabulary play, and I'm kind of glad that Paul maybe struggled with some vocabulary things that many times we do, trying to describe these things. It's to know what passes knowledge is not about, and I don't want to do Greek gymnastics right now, but it's a knowing that you don't learn. It's something you recognize through awareness. Now, this sound may ambiguous, but let's view it through a different window. And today's entire message is how we become conscious and aware. And it's not about reading texts that help us do that. So with that, I want to go to the name. It is the I Am Remembered, Part 5, the Eternal Return, the Gospel according to or through the Wizard of Oz. It's about remembering. So it's remembering today. Now, this idea known as the eternal return, that is what the Wizard of Oz really is all about. The phrase was first coined by Eliade in 1949, who was a historian of religion and spiritual philosopher. He coined the phrase in his work, The Myth of the Eternal Return. One of the most famous sightings of this eternal return is the prodigal son story. But, and that's in Luke 15, by the way, but it occurs in other places as well. 2,000 or so years ago, when Jesus spoke that story, which we thankfully found its way into the New Testament, he wasn't the first, though, to bring that idea. Homer's Odyssey, back in 700 BCE, speaks of the eternal return. Then there's the shipwrecked sailor, dating 2000 BCE in the Egyptian Middle Kingdom. Around the same time, there was the story of Sinui, and it's preceded almost 1,000 years to the early, if you can imagine, 3rd millennium BCE by the Gilgamesh traditions. Why is this so important? Because when spiritual truth shows up in different places by solid sources for many millennia, there is something to be said about it. It would be T.S. Eliot who would say in his 4 quartets writing, quote, "In my end is my beginning." That's from the writing called East Coker. Then he quotes in The Little Gidding, "To arrive where we started and know the place for the first time." To arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. He would bring these forth during 1936 and 1942, which is a key point, because not only is our end in our beginning, most importantly, it's when we return, we get to know ourselves and see that place in an entirely different way for the first time. Well, at the same time T.S. Eliot was penning those words, another depiction of the same concept came to us in graphic cinematography. Have a look at the screen. The Wizard of Oz. Who would have thought, by the way, that that original poster would be movable once I put it through AI? It's none other, again, than the Wizard of Oz. I want to take you on a journey today that I've shared a bit before. Matter of fact, I put it in my last 2 books because I thought it was so important in Tree of Life Realities, Melchizedek Volume 2, as well as my latest book, which is The God Who Never Wanted to Be God. So let's kind of tell this retelling of the prodigal son. To give us an idea, for almost 2 years here at Oasis, we've been telling this story in different ways. But this one, I think, may be the most fun. And hopefully, when I get done, you may want to go home and rewatch The Wizard of Oz, because there's much to learn from it. So let me give you a quick overview. It starts with this fella, L. Frank Baum. L. Frank Baum was a very spiritual person and a spiritual seeker. Like many of his time, like very much today, and understandably so, he found evangelical Christianity a poor depiction of God, a poor depiction of Christ, and a poor depiction of our human story. So, on September 4th, 1892, just 7 years before he would complete The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, he and his wife Maud would join the Theosophical Society of Chicago. If you want an understanding, a small aspect of what that means, I remember reading this book 8 years ago, written by a woman named Annie Wood Bazant, and she was one of the leaders of the Theosophical Society, actually around the world. This is her. And she's best known at the time for her contributions to social reform and, very importantly, women's rights, as well as the Theosophical Society. In her book, Esoteric Christianity, which was published virtually the same time Baum's Wonderful Wizard of Oz, she writes this: "The rebellion against popular Christianity was due to the awakening and the growth of conscience. It was the conscience that revolted, as well as the intelligence against teachings dishonoring to God and man alike, that represented God as a tyrant and man as essentially evil, gaining salvation by slavish submission." Wow. She continues, "Slowly, as Christian teachers lost touch with spiritual truths and they reflected their own increasing intolerance and harshness on the pure and loving Father of the teachings of the Christ, they represented him as an angry man with the Christ who was made to save man from the wrath of God instead of the bondage of evil." She continues, "To the early Christian, Christ was the living symbol of his own divinity." Now, when she means own divinity, it was not Christ's own divinity, our own divinity. Christ was the living symbol of his own divinity, the glorious fruit of the seed he bore in his own heart, not to be saved by an external Christ, but to be glorified into an inner Christ. Well, this is the mindset that Baum had in writing this story. Okay? Very aware. Now, it doesn't stop, because by the time the 1930s roll around and The Wizard of Oz is released, Baum has been dead for a couple decades. But there's something to be said for that, because then this fellow, who, while we continue to talk about Baum's work, it's important that we mention this fellow, Noel Langley, who is also a theosophist, who was writing the screenplay for Oz and knew exactly what the continuity should have been. With that in mind, let's look at this. We'll look at it from the 1939 film standpoint, because it's most accessible to everybody, rather than maybe, I mean, you can still read the original book, but there are things that the film brings to life in it, because, of course, it's condensed in 90 minutes. That is very well done to bring about some of these truths. So, again, in Baum's story, he transforms the son from Luke 15, keep in mind of women's suffrage at the time, into a young girl who becomes the heroine of the story, who returns home with a realized identity and new eyes. Powerful stuff. Now, at the beginning of the movie, we see this. For nearly 40 years, this story has given faithful service to the young in heart, and time has been powerless to put this kindly philosophy out of fashion. To those of you who have been faithful to it in return, and to the young in heart, we dedicate this picture. Focusing on this statement, time has been powerless to put its kindly philosophy out of fashion. This is more than a children's story. The story begins with Dorothy, performed by Judy Garland, running home, upset that the nasty Miss Gulch, performed by Margaret Hamilton, she's on the right there, tried to hit her dog with a rake. How dare she? What Dorothy didn't tell anyone, which we find out in the scene above, as Dorothy carelessly allows Toto to run free into Mrs. Gulch's garden, chasing her cat and eating her flowers. After many warnings, Miss Gulch was fed up with Toto and Dorothy's carelessness, and when she tried to get him out of her yard with the rake, Toto bit her. While her Aunt Em and her Uncle Henry were busy working and basically brushing her off, Dorothy goes to the farm workers, which was Honk, Hickory, and Zeke, who you get to know them a little later as Scarecrow, Tin Man, and Cowardly Lion, to tell them their plight, but they're too busy, making snide comments about Miss Gulch. And after a few interactions, we find Dorothy probably going to sing one of the most famous songs in musical history, Somewhere Over the Rainbow. While the song is absolutely beautiful and beautifully sung, the story takes shape. Dorothy is a stranger to her home, and her aspirations are of a distant land. Very prodigal-like. So as beautiful as the song is, you got to think of what's motivating it here. She's not present. She wants out of there. She's looking. This place doesn't satisfy me, and you can see why in the interactions. But Dorothy is all about herself. What's interesting is this is similar to us in the Garden of Eden. While there is a reality of us being members of the divine family, we are ignorant and clueless as to what that is and what's going on around us, except what we selfishly desire and what matters to us. That comes, by the way, with a serious caveat. Gulch goes off to the sheriff. Mind you, she's been bitten. She goes off to the sheriff to get permission to euthanize the dog. That's in the script, actually, as well as the book. Okay? While that may sound cruel, back in the early 20th century, that was the law in most municipals at the time because of the fear of rabies. For example, and I'm quoting, "Any dog that bites shall be destroyed. Any dog running at large that injures a person will be killed and can be killed by that citizen." Gulch wasn't doing anything that was not within her perimeters. It was Dorothy that really created the problem, and for that matter, all that's to ensue. Why? Because Dorothy was unconscious of what was around her and within her. As we progress, we'll find that Toto is actually an image of Dorothy's ego. At the moment, it's unrestrained and only behaving out of its basic instinct, going for selfish gratification alone. The only recourse for Miss Gulch was to use the law to restrain Dorothy's ego. Well, needless to say, Gulch does take the dog, and we see that scene with her riding away, but Toto manages to escape and run home. He runs home, and of course, Dorothy, as soon as he comes home to her, she decides to run away. And as she runs away, she meets this guy, Professor Marvel, not related to Captain Marvel.
Not at all.
A kind-hearted, good-natured fake. Doing what he can do to stay alive. He talks her into returning home by telling her a lie that her Auntie Em has had a heart attack, or depicting that she's had a heart attack. As Dorothy returns home in a panic and she gets closer to home, a fierce tornado appears. This is kind of important now because, which we're going to see in this picture, so the tornado crops up. By the way, I won't get into it too much, but that's a woman's stocking that they have draped from the ceiling on a moving beam and throwing out. The special effects was spectacular for 1930s. It's just what they were able to do at the time. That said, anyway, the closer Dorothy gets home, the stronger the tornado becomes. There's a couple of reasons for that. And I'll probably repeat them again in a little bit. But she's not ready to be home with new eyes. So what happens? A window pane is blown into her room when she goes into her room. By the way, the family has gone down into a storm shelter. So she goes into the house alone looking for Aunt Em and the group. And she goes into her room and a window pane comes off, bangs her on the head and knocks her out. She and Toto then are caught up in the tornado. And when she regains some level of consciousness, everything transforms before her eyes. One of my favorite telling moments is when Miss Gulch appears caught up in the winds riding her bicycle. There's sound to this, so watch this. But I love the sound because of what we're about to hear.
Oh, Miss Gulch!
You gotta love that cackling laugh. I mean, Margaret Hamilton was excellent. Okay, absolutely excellent. So let's stop at this point because we need to set up and unpack some things. Though Dorothy wanted to go home, sadly on a lie, she wasn't ready to see it for what it truly was. Instead, her attempted journey home becomes a necessary journey into her subconscious, into the necessary land of illusion she creates till her journeys through the necessary process to finally come home fully conscious and aware is finished and fulfilled. Again, the prodigal son story is no different. He too must journey to a distant country, one of his own creation, by the way, if you read the text carefully, with adversity and hunger. It's not until he starts to come to himself he can begin the journey home, but even then, there's a key moment that prevents him fully arriving until he has transformed his thinking. Well, then there's this wonderful scene. Love it a lot. It's at this point one of the most famous lines in cinema history is said by Judy Garland, and here it is.
Toto, I have a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore.
Toto, I have a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore. Actually, as we've discussed in the other two previous series of teaching, she is in the inner world of her spiritual self, as Jung would call it, the Shadowlands. But true Christian and Baum, Langley, Besant, theosophical circles will tell you it is the world we now live in right now. Truthfully, for many, it is the very real Munchkin world. It's the world of shadows and illusions. Let me take a moment to define illusion for a minute, because when we think of illusion, many times we think of some kind of hallucination or a mirage. That's not an illusion. An illusion, by definition, is a misinterpretation of something that's actually there. The misinterpretation is that most of us interpret this life through our shadows and not from divine reality within. Some may say that there are at least two realities, the physical and the spiritual, but actually that's not really true. There's one reality, what I'm about to say, one reality emanates all forms, each refracting it through different dimensions, some thick with illusion and others nearer to clarity. In short, there's one reality, many dimensions. Some cloud it, some clarify it. For Dorothy to realize with clarity who she is and what her origin is, she had to go into a reality of shadows of her creation to discover the truth. In the same way the Adam, the man and the woman, had to create and choose the serpent's tree of the knowledge of good and evil to enter a world of their illusions to discover who they really were in the end. Thus, the so-called fall, which creates this world in which we live, is that scenario. This is our Munchkin land. And it's no different than the house that fell into Munchkin land here. Which brings us to an important point. The house lands on the Wicked Witch of the East. Interesting. Who has powerful slippers, which is a key thing, because they get transferred, as you can see, to Dorothy's feet. At the same time the movie was being produced, we find Alexander Volkov telling the same story called The Wizard of the Emerald City, in which he states that the Wicked Witch of the East conjures tornadoes. Why? Consider the full name of Dorothy. It's Dorothy Gale, as in gale force winds. Dorothy and the Wicked Witch of the East are connected. No differently than Adam the serpent and Satan are all tied together. From a God point of view, this is not a bad or wrong thing, because in the long view, this is what takes us to receive revelation, enlightenment, and realization of our divine identity. Here's a crazy verse I never heard preached anywhere except besides myself in 41 years of ministry. Genesis 3:22. And said Yahweh of the powers, said, behold, the Adam became like one of us to know good and evil. There's something about this process of the world of shadows, or the world we live in now, that is to help us, the duality, to create the Trinity. For those of you, side note, this goes way back to Pythagoras, who also created what's known as the monad, the dyad, and the triad. The monad is that one divine emanation of all and in all things. But then he creates the dyad, something opposite to himself, the desire to receive, Genesis factor, okay, that. But then balance comes with the third, which we would call the Trinity, the Son. And that then brings balance, so all other things can have balance. That was an interesting little quick teaching on that. Let's continue. The point is, this was the path we solely chose from Eden, as Dorothy did from Kansas. And while it seems from one perspective disobedience and the wrong thing to do, it is the self-constructed path in the end game that will bring a level of enlightenment, revelation, and consciousness that will give us awareness of our true identity and see our origin, our home, with new eyes for the first time. To say all this another way, it was Dorothy in her inner world of Munchkin Land that would help conjure the gale force winds that produced the tornado in Kansas, so she can enter her and face herself in a world that would bring about the consciousness and awareness she, as just like Adam, would need. With that said, the house drops on the Wicked Witch of the East and is miraculously transferred to her. Was it because she killed the Wicked Witch of the East, or is Dorothy developing from the Wicked Witch of the East? One more point about the ruby slippers. I've heard some well-meaning ministers say they meant the blood of Jesus. Sorry, once again, here is what they call eisegesis as opposed to exegesis. Or eisegesis is when you totally take your own beliefs and meanings and insert them into a story. Okay? And call a God on top of it. So, no, this is eisegesis. This is something us ministers do sometimes when we think we see something, but it's not there. The only reason the slippers became red and not silver, as according to the book, according to the National Museum of American History, and I quote, to take advantage of new Technicolor technology, the slippers were changed from the book's silver to an iridescent red hue. Full stop. They look way better on yellow brick roads than silver ones did. So this, of course, is when the Wicked Witch of the West shows up and demands her sister's powerful slippers. But of course, we're not told until the end what power they really had. But who is the Wicked Witch? She is Dorothy's creation in this world. Because if you remember, she was Dorothy's unbridled, unconscious ego that created the problem. Now Dorothy, in illusionary lands, is having to deal with herself and her created nemesis. You could say the Wicked Witch of the West is a type of an alter ego as well as the other characters we will meet, the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, the Cowardly Lion, and of course the Wizard himself. What's interesting is throughout the entire story, the Wicked Witch of the West never has any power over Dorothy at any point. Only threats and minor attacks on the other characters. This kind of points to 1 Peter 5:8, which tells us that our adversary walks about seeking whom he may devour. Such devouring can't just happen out of nowhere on anyone. It's a metaphor. It looks for those who can be. In other words, only those who believe they can be devoured. Well, Dorothy, frightened by Elphaba, those of you know, Elphaba is the Wicked Witch's name, right? And from Wicked. And for those of you who didn't know, I love the little fun fact. Elphaba is the first three syllables of L. Frank Baum. Elphaba. That's how she got her name, which is kind of cool. All Dorothy wants to do is go home. It's then Glinda, the Good Witch of the North, tells Dorothy that there is someone who can help her. It's the wonderful Wizard of Oz. So she's off to see the wizard, the wonderful Wizard of Oz, by following the yellow brick road. Dorothy's on her way, and her first encounter is this guy, the Scarecrow. He claims he doesn't have a brain, so he's got no knowledge. So Dorothy suggests for him to join her on a quest to see the wizard. Now, I'm skipping over stuff because I just want to hit the key points. Of course, something then very interesting happens in their experience. They find themselves hungry, particularly Dorothy, and goes to an apple tree. Right, this is interesting. Goes to an apple tree. Let me see if it's on this slide. There it is. Goes to an apple tree who happens to be a living being and slaps her hand. And the Scarecrow shouts, quote, "Come on, Dorothy, you don't want any of those apples." The tree replies, "Are you hinting my apples aren't what they ought to be?" Scarecrow, "Oh no, it's just she doesn't like little green worms." As a result, the tree starts throwing apples at them. Of course, they harvest them and take off. Here's a point. The Scarecrow's thinking. How is that possible? See, he believes he doesn't have something when it's always been there. At this point, it's almost a quick retelling of the Garden of Eden story. The woman, Dorothy, picks the fruit. The result is with insult. The man, the Scarecrow, starts thinking. Think what just happened in the garden. The woman takes it, gives it to her husband, but now he's thinking. But with the thinking in the garden comes the egoic accusation of God and the woman. But the story continues to unpack. In other words, there's a knowledge thing connected. That's not a bad thing. Genesis 3:22, behold, they become like one of us. We've got to get to that step to evolve into what God really has for us. That said, they go down the yellow brick road once again, and then they meet someone else. This guy. The Tin Man. They find the Tin Man rusted and immovable because he was attempting to chop down a tree when it started to rain and he rusted. Think of this. We then find out when the Tin Man can speak that he doesn't have a heart. Think of the truth to this. We just found out trees are living things and he was about to chop one down. That's pretty heartless. But once again, Dorothy suggests that maybe if he comes on the journey with her, and the brainless Scarecrow, throw that in there, okay, to see the wizard, maybe he can get a heart. No sooner do they leave, they go into the darkest, scariest part of the forest, where then they meet what we will call eventually the Cowardly Lion. But we meet this lion who appears to be aggressive, arrogant, and self-centered, who hurls tantalizing insults, quote, "Come on, get up and fight, you shivering junkyard. Put your hands up, you lopsided bag of hay." You see, where some of our deepest fears lie is where our ego screams insults. How many times is that voice saying things to us like, "You idiot, what were you thinking? How could you do that? Don't you even care?" Then the other part of our ego steps in and shouts, "Stop, don't think like that." This is when little Toto shows up barking. Remember, he's an egoic character as well. So that insulting, accusing lion within us reacts back. When he does, Dorothy slaps him on the nose and he starts to cry. He's not as intimidating as he seems. He's really a coward. He's afraid. All that boisterous antagonizing was just covering a frightened, unconscious self. This is the inner world of Dorothy. She was thoughtless regarding what happened to Mr. Gulch, only thought of herself. She was unconsciously heartless regarding what she put Mrs. Gulch through with her cat and garden. Underneath it all, in her self-centeredness, she didn't realize her selfishness and insulted Miss Gulch as evil and the enemy. She actually says to her at the beginning of the movie, quote, "You wicked old witch, Uncle Henry, Auntie Em, don't let him take Toto." So it's right there. In the movie, the book, it's set out that Elphaba in the original Wizard of Oz is the creation of Dorothy. This is when our ego, now in a form of a lion, growls its pontifications from a moralistic, religious, self-centered way through sounding quite godly. But underneath it all, there's nothing more than an unconscious spiritual self. Consider the crucifixion. The statement Jesus made is beyond comprehension to the religious mind and many times gets misinterpreted to mean something other than it was said. Hanging on the cross, Jesus says, quote, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do." Luke 23:34. Think about that. Wait, what? Think of our modern religious response. Be more like, quote, "I'm a child of God. Scripture says I'm God's friend, and my God will judge you for what you're doing to me now. You sinner, you morally bankrupt individual. You're headed for hell unless you repent and get me off this cross." But what does Jesus say? They don't know what they do. They're unconscious. To make an honorable mention, the Greek phrase has a particular word, odasin. Okay, it's ogar odasin te poiosin, which is the key phrase there. Know what they do, or what they do. Okay, that knowing there is not knowing something in the mind. It means to actually see something. They don't see it. They don't get what's happening here. So we now have, if you will, an unconscious trinity. Remember, the three bring the balance. But one doesn't know. He's thoughtless. He doesn't have a brain. The other one doesn't have a heart. And the other one, well, he's got no spine. So at this point, Dorothy invites the Cowardly Lion to join them on their way to see the wizard. The same is true of the prodigal son. He had to come to himself, but it didn't happen until he says he had, right, until it says he journeyed from a far country and wasted his possessions with prodigal living. And then it says this phrase in that text, "But when he spent all, there arose a famine in the land, and he began to want." When he spent all, there was a famine. Prior to then, when he didn't spend it all, there was no famine. See, this is all go back to that text. It's all self-created. I mean, there's that other segment where he talks about, he's feeding pigs now, right? He joins himself to a person who winds up feeding pigs, and then he says he's even hungry for the pig slop, but no one will give him any. You got it in your hands. You understand? This is a self-made story, a very different story maybe than the way we've read it in the past. Well, finally, skipping over a lot of information, we get to the Emerald City. Ta-da! The wonderful thing, they ring the bell. They go, who rang that bell? You know? He goes, don't you see the sign? Of course, there's no sign. Then he puts it out there and he shuts the thing, and then they knock and they go, oh, that's better, you know? But there is something to that in the story. If you go back and re-look at some of this, there is one who knocks. There's something about knocking. Thank you to the Wicked book and the Broadway musical, now the fabulous movies that have been released. There's a very important connection between the greenness of the witch and the greenness of the Emerald City. Why? Because they all come from the same source. What's interesting about the greenness, why that was chosen, why Baum chose this, why this has maintained itself, is because of this actual relic known as the Sacro Cantino in Genoa, Italy, in the Museum of the Treasure of the Cathedral of San Lorenzo, this here. This is believed was the actual dish, more so than a cup, that Christ used at the Last Supper. You'll find that throughout the Grail legends, that the journey of the Grail is always the journey into the heart. In the Queste del San Graal, which was written way back in 1215 AD, how long ago that was, it's 800 years ago, it actually says that the Grail, or the cup of Christ, is the heart of man. That thread continues to appear. If you go back almost 200 years earlier, you now meet the Emerald Tablet of Hermes Trismegistus, which has a whole nother dynamic, but it's also about the journeys of in the heart, and it's a wisdom writing. And yes, Theosophists knew very well about that. Matter of fact, the guy that brought Baum to the Chicago Theosophical Society actually wrote a book on it. Well, now they're at the door, and of course, they say, we want to see the Wizard of Oz. And the doorman tells them, quote, nobody can see the great Oz. Nobody's ever seen the great Oz. Even I've never seen him. This is where Baum addresses the gods of our own making, especially the wrathful God we mentioned earlier. That was a distortion of the gospel. First, you can't see him. No one has. You only can believe in him. Finally, when the doorman realizes that this is the Dorothy that we're all concerned about, particularly calls her the witch's Dorothy, he opens up the door and they come in. But before they can even think about seeing Oz, they have to be cleansed and purified. So they go through ritual cleansings. Upon entry in its typical, well, this particular scene is just a great scene, first of all. You know, when they finally get in there, it looks like a big church, the corridor that they walk into, and they finally get to the throne room of the great, or the great and powerful Oz, right? Yeah. Shooting flames surround the throne, and an image with a booming voice proclaims, quote, I am Oz, the great and powerful. They ask their requests and get ridiculed for them with statements like, you dare come to me for a heart, do you? You clinking, clanging, clattering collection of colliginous, that's hard, colliginous junk. You see, this God is holy. See? And mere mortals are unworthy. Even after they're cleaned up, they still are only in his presence only because he's allowing it. When the cowardly lion tries to speak, the throne bursts into flames and he passes out. Boom. But something happens. Dorothy finds the courage to talk back at this Oz god. Quote, "You ought to be ashamed of yourself frightening him like that when he came to you for help." Dorothy is no longer the selfish little girl from Kansas, you see. She's discovering her love from her friend has given her courage. Oz demands silence and tells her he will grant them their requests, but only after they return with the broomstick of the Wicked Witch. To which the Tin Man replies, quote, "But if we do that, we'll have to kill her to get it." The wizard clearly doesn't care, because this god wizard wants a sacrifice. You don't get your request granted without sacrifice. Let's pause for a moment and explore something. In the illusionary realm of our world, like the world of Oz, in order to have a holy, righteous God, there must be an unholy, unrighteous devil. Let's be clear. Religious people, not truly conscious ones, will make a devil if one isn't available. They love their devil. If you take away their devil, hell, and the demonic, they'll crucify you, pun intended. They'll call you deceived and a heretic. Suddenly, the so-called good God they serve is represented by anger and accusation. Now, who's really the accuser in that? For example, 5th of February, Karen and I are going to the Laker game, taking her for her birthday, and my phone goes off because somebody made a comment on one of our videos. It was the I Am That I Am. I'm just going to read. It's still there if you want to read the whole exchange. But he said, quote, "You're on the path to damnation. It's one thing to perish, but to pull others with you is the ultimate betrayal." And he wanted to know by what authorities of the scriptural authorities I had, to all this, and what authority of. He talked about biblical authority and all this stuff. And it's just like, it's typical. It's typical. I said to him at one point, I just said, well, I'm sure you must have listened to all the videos to finally come to that conclusion. But, sorry, my sarcasm got the best of me there. A lot quickly happens after they leave. The witch sends her flying monkeys to capture Dorothy and Toto and are successful. That's them dragging her away. It's a great little bit. They run, she hoists into the air, and you can tell this little doll thing with the little legs moving. It's great. It's great. Again, special effects of the day. It was cool. So she and Toto are brought to the witch, where a famous moment happens when the witch tries to take the slippers and she gets zapped. This is where we see all the inner world discoveries starting to take shape. The witch once again threatens Dorothy by telling her she's going to kill Toto. And the only way she can stop that is if she gives her the slippers. The dog at that moment bites her again and escapes, but this time not selfishly running away. It looks for the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and the Lion. Now, Toto gets them to follow it back to rescue Dorothy, and it's a great, hilarious bit of them trying to get into the witch's castle and free Dorothy. Definitely worth seeing. But they don't get very far. They do manage to get Dorothy out of the room, but right away the witch is right there. So the witch... They try to run again. The witch and the Winky guards, that's what they're called. I don't know why Winky is the name, but the Winky guards, they trap them. And the witch looks up at a torch lights the tip of her broom on fire and says, "How about a little fire, Scarecrow?" and lights his arm on fire. Thinking quickly, Dorothy reaches for a nearby bucket of water, and when she splashes it on the Scarecrow's arm, the witch is doused with water as well and begins to melt, crying. You remember this a little bit? You love it, right? "Oh, you cursed brat! Look what you've done! I'm melting! I'm melting! Oh, what a world! What a world! Who would have thought a good little girl like you can destroy my beautiful wickedness? Oh, look out! Look out! I'm going! Oh, oh!" Yeah. You killed her. Yeah. She goes, "Well, I didn't mean to." He's like, "No, they're happy. They're right."
Yeah.
Interesting, though, there's really no killing, no stabbing, no blood. Instead, she melts. Why? She's no longer necessary. She's no longer necessary. Consider what has happened. Dorothy has found love, not selfish now, love for people, for friends. From that love came courage. And now, in that moment, that courage helped her overcome any selfish, fearful desires. And she used her head, thinking, for the sake of her friend, to save him. So what happens? Her selfishness has turned into having a heart. From having a heart, she no longer fears. She has courage. And she thinks for the betterment of others. Transformation is taking place. But we're still not done. We got to go back to Oz. They return to the Emerald City and present themselves before the great and powerful Oz and offer him the broom. But the great and powerful Oz decides not to receive it today. Another God thing. All sacrifices are still at his discretion, Leviticus 22:19-21. Just because you offer it doesn't mean he'll accept it or answer your prayer. The wizard says he still needs to think about it and for them to come back tomorrow. Then another line, a famous moment in movie history, Toto runs over to a green curtain, pulls it back, only to reveal that the great and powerful Oz is a fake. It's reminiscent of the veil in the temple being torn by Jesus' death on the cross to reveal an empty chamber. Here's that wonderful scene. There is sound to this, too.
Do not arouse the wrath of the great and powerful Oz. I said come back tomorrow.
If you are really great and powerful, you'll keep your promises.
Do you presume to criticize the great Oz? You ungrateful creatures, think yourselves lucky that I'm giving you audience tomorrow instead of 20 years from now. Oh, the great Oz has spoken. Oh, pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. The great Oz has spoken.
Who are you?
Oh, I am the great and powerful Wizard of Oz.
You are? I don't believe you.
No, I'm afraid it's true. There's no other wizard except me. You humbug! Yes, it's exactly so. I'm a humbug.
Oh.
So, the great and powerful Oz is a humbug. Exactly. He's make-believe. See, all that is make-believe. That kind of God is make-believe. And that's the next thing that had to be thrown over. The witch had to come to her end. Now the wizard has to come to his. Very powerful, too. The wizard does say, though, I can get you home. So he gets to this hot air balloon that he had evidently for a long time there. And he gets in it with Dorothy to take her home. And of course, the wizard gives a self-aggrandizing speech on why he's going to take Dorothy back so he can hobnob with other wizards. Toto, still in form, sees a cat and jumps out of Dorothy's arms to chase it. But he's quickly caught this time. Dorothy jumps out of the hot air balloon and gets him. And it's at this point, when you watch the movie, focus on the Tin Man. Because what he does is kind of interesting. He will unwrap the rope and let the balloon begin to rise. Then as soon as they begin to realize he's beginning to rise, they try to hold on to the ropes, which, by the way, they could easily have kept him down, all three of them. That's not an issue. But, of course, they let him go. In the book, the ropes just snap, and the wizard ascends. Dorothy is once again distraught. That was the last part of the revelation, enlightenment, and wholeness that had to happen. She had to let go of the external God. Remember what Annie said? The external. Let go of the external God that could save her. In that moment, then Glinda appears, and this, I love it, is the dialogue between them. Dorothy, oh, will you help me? Can you help me? Glinda, you don't need to be helped any longer. You've always had the power to go back to Kansas. Dorothy, I have? Scarecrow, then why didn't you tell her before? Glinda, because she wouldn't have believed me. She had to learn it for herself. Why? She believed, her beliefs, was an external God going to save her. There was an external devil that was against her. She had to come past all of those things to realize the power was always within her. Hence the kingdom of God within you, for example. Christ in you, the hope of glory. You can start going through scriptures, but we don't need them here for the story's sake, but that's the story being told. Of course, Glinda then tells her to click her heels 3 times, and she's back home. Not long after the tornado is gone, awakening on her bed with all the cast of characters who are part of the dream, but seeing and valuing her home with a new sense of identity and with new eyes. Before we go to that last little picture, I just want to point out to you that Dorothy never left home. She went to another world, but she never actually left home. I'm going to suggest to you, we never left Eden. We're still there. And it's realizing within ourselves that. You see, what's happened with Dorothy and her friends is Tin Man always had a heart. Scarecrow always had a brain. Cowardly Lion, he wasn't really that much of a coward. And all those different aspects within Dorothy, she had all those things. They had to, however, take a journey through that distant land to discover that divine identity and realize what home really looks like. That said, she wakes up in her bed, and these are her final words, which are these are her words, which are the final words of the movie. Home, and this is my room. And you're all here, and I'm not going to leave ever, ever again, because I love you all, and oh, Auntie M, there's no place like home. Makes you want to cry. But see, the thing is she's discovered a whole new world because of the transformation and the journey she went through. What I'm suggesting to you all is that we're on a journey, folks. The real us never really left Eden, but we're still on a journey. With the crazy phrase, if you can grasp what I'm saying, with the help of the fall. It became a necessary path for us to discover and become conscious ourselves. The catch is, if you live in a world where all you do is believe in winky guards, monkeys, flying monkeys particularly, witches, angry trees, all that stuff, right? It's a real world to you. In my book, I pointed out that there are folks who say, no, that you got to be careful. Those demons over there, and you got to be over here, and you can't because the devil's going to do this and the devil's going to do that. It's like, you know, if you believe that, that's your world. You know why Jesus did miracles? You know why those things never bothered him? Not like that. He wasn't living from that space. Though he was here in this space, incarnated. And he said, greater works can we do. Wow.